Hey, George, you're a scientist.
I'm a chemist, yes.
Right, you're a scientist. What do you think is the weirdest thing in Star Trek? Like, scientifically speaking, like, what's the weirdest science thing in all of Star Trek?
Lions, look, I'm a chemist, not an astrophysicist, but if I were to take my very, very limited and very, very focused knowledge and apply it to this, I've got some thoughts on that. So, first of all, in Star Trek in general, there is a lot of magic, which is a fancy way of saying modified physics, right? So, so one of the things is that I always loved was subspace, right? Because it was just a great, like, empty basket for them to just throw science stuff in when they were like, look, this doesn't make for a good story. Like, saying that the Enterprise hasn't spoken to anyone on Earth for millions of years because they are so far away, like, you know, in so many light years, it's like, that doesn't make for good stories. So it travels through subspace, which is magic, right?
And subspace is... Was that a Star Trek invention? Because there are definitely...
To my knowledge.
Okay, because there are definitely more recent sci-fi things I've encountered that are like, I don't know, subspace.
Yeah, because I mean, it's just in like the lexicon now where quantum has also just become like magic. You know,
it does
whenever you
just
need
mean
to...
magic.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's the quantum entangled. Okay, magic. Got it. So that being said, subspace is interesting, but I am a little bit curious, before I answer this question, what do you think's the most unrealistic thing? Because then I'm going to tell you that you're wrong.
Oh, that's a good like role reversal because one, I think you probably know Star Trek better than I do. And two, they keep adding more Star Trek. And I suspect some of the new Star Trek probably has things that I as a layperson would be like, oh, that's insane. That's insane. That thing is insane. I think in Discovery, there's like, they travel through like a parallel universe that allows for like instantaneous transportation, which I'm sure is just straight up magic. So that anything that's like moving information or physical objects like instantly through space is where I kind of cock an eyebrow. So like transporters always seemed sort of insane, but I think the one that bugs me the most is the flippancy of the universal translator. Because like,
that's fair.
How would that work like culturally? Like, this must be all of like the Federation's beliefs imposed onto other like, we have no idea what they sound like or what they're actually saying. We're just imagining.
Well, and also, too, the thing that I think that's interesting about the universal translator is that somehow it's able to discern when you want to be speaking and you're like, you don't want it to translate, you know?
Yes.
So,
yeah,
like,
so
the thing also be like,
able to divine intent.
Yeah, where it's like, you filthy patak. It's like, why didn't you translate that? Yeah, and to be fair, though, there is an episode, one of my favorite ones, where they do go into the fact that it does take some front-end legwork to make the universal translator work. They do actually...
Right, and we just often don't see it because that's not interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, though, you did touch on a thing that is the most unrealistic, which is the transporters, right? Because interestingly, unlike in Discovery, where apparently starships have, from what I can gather, become obsolete because they can travel sixth dimensionally or something.
Oh, it's the one, which of course...
Oh.
Yeah, there's a funny plot contrivance where they're like, no one can know about this because then they would like attack us to steal this technology. And I was like, oh, that's my favorite thing that writers do. That's the throwaway line that explains why this technology does not exist in future Star Trek series.
It's not ubiquitous. But so interestingly, though, the problem with the transporters, right, is that you're not traveling instantaneously. You are being... They're taking your structure, breaking it down into pure energy, shooting that energy somewhere, and then reconstructing it in theory, right? So there's three problems that I have with that. One, energy. Two, information. And three, psychological or philosophical, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, energy. So do you remember the law of the conservation of energy and law of the conservation of mass?
Like energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed.
Transform, change. You got it, right? Yeah. Nailed it. Yep. 10 out of 10. Go back. You are effectively a chemist now.
Yeah. My sophomore chemistry teacher is so excited.
So the interesting thing is as we all know, there's an equation that links those two things together, which is E equals mc squared, right? So the amount of energy in a given substance is equal to mass times the speed of light squared, right? Which basically means that the only thing you need to know is the mass, right? How much stuff there is directly correlates to how much energy there is, right? Interestingly, right, is that what that then translates to is joules, right? So once you have the mass, you have the associated energy. So let's assume that we're transporting Picard, right? Just one Picard, right?
One dude wearing a jumpsuit.
Exactly. I would guess that he weighs about 81 kilograms. I don't know what he would weigh in pounds because pounds are used by troglodytes. So let's say he weighs about 81 kilograms, right? Gut check. How much energy do you think that he would have?
Well, I mean, if I plugged it into that handy formula, which I can't crunch that math in my head, but like
you can't do the speed of light squared in your head.
No, I can't. I'm a layperson. I'm gonna guess it's like so much more than you would imagine. Like if you had an equivalent volume of like explosives, that would be like less total energy, right? Just like
substantially less.
Yeah, there's just a lot of person in a person.
There is. And that's the thing is that with if you had a bunch of chemicals that you, or say TNT, that you had crafted into one plastique human, right? You're actually not destroying the matter to make energy. You're just breaking chemical bonds, right? Like all of the matter
you're releasing energy from those bonds.
Correct. Right. You're putting the atoms in a lower ground state of, or closer to ground state of energy. You would, if you were to take Picard and translate him into energy, you would have about 1.16 billion gigajoules of energy, right?
It sounds like a lot because it has the fun prefix giga.
It does. But the thing is that, I know that I'm talking to a layperson, right? So I went ahead and took that number and did fun things with it. That is the same as 1.16 gigatons of TNT.
Gigatons.
Gigatons.
Don't we measure atomic weapons in megatons?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. So, which is interesting because, yes, it would be the equivalent of about 1,000 nuclear bombs, right?
Cool.
Yeah. So you now have all of that energy that you got to do. So basically, the minute they go energize, they set off 1,000 nuclear bombs, and that's just for Picard, right? That's not the whole away team, right? Where you have 5,000 nukes that you just set off in the Enterprise, right? So the thing is, then you have to, but then they're like, their energy is in the transport buffer, right? Which is again, it's just super hand wavy magic, right? Don't worry about it. It's the buffer. So the question is, what is it buffering, right? Well, it's either buffering energy or information, right? So we'll get to information in a second. If it were energy, right, it ostensibly be being stored in batteries, which means that you would need, if it was like take-home batteries, like a AA, right, you would need about 100 billion of those to store one Picard, right?
This is what actually powers the warp core. Is every year the transporter fails, and that's how they charge the warp core.
Oh no, poor Barclay.
Ensign Ricky.
Ricky, no. So actually, what I went ahead and did, because I'm a nerd and I have too much time on my hands, is that I said, okay. Basically, the interesting thing was with lithium ion batteries. So assuming that they don't have new battery technology, which they almost certainly do, but I don't know that magic. I know this magic. So assuming that they're using lithium ion batteries, which is the most sophisticated battery like type that we have, all of the bigger batteries are just better at doing that chemical reaction, to the best of my knowledge, right? And again, just the chemist. But basically, is the storage capacity of a battery is based off of its volume. Right. So bigger battery, make more storage. Right. And approximating the size of the Enterprise, you would need 2.5 solid Enterprises of battery to store one Picard, which, again, bringing it back to like in-universe logic. Right. I'm like, that has now become silly because the Enterprise is not one giant battery. They have like holodecks and stuff in there.
Yeah, lots of empty space for people to walk around and to do long walks down hallways, West Wing style.
Exactly. So that's energy, right? How are you storing? You've just, turned one full-blown person into pure energy. It's like, okay, great. What are you doing with all that? I mean, to be fair, the best thing you could do is just beam somebody onto the Klingon vessel and then just Literate, you know. Boom goes the dynamite. Boom goes the 1.6 gigatons of dynamite. So 2 is information, right? So now here's the thing, right? Is that so they've taken all of you and they turned it into energy that they're then going to use to reconstruct you, right? So how they're doing that raises a lot of questions, right? But the average human, so let's assume that they're doing it the most labor intensive way possible, because the other ways are probably better, but it leads us to question 3, right? Which is the average human has about 1 times 10 to the 27th atoms, which is about a billion atoms, right? That we have in us, right? So each one of those atoms is being converted to energy, which means that you need to keep track of, which ones they were, right?
Yeah, it matters. Like, when you reassemble a puzzle or like a model kit, like the pieces need to go in the right spot.
Exactly, right? So if you're just keeping track of, let's say it takes 1 byte of information to keep track of the molecule that it is, right? Or not the molecule, the atom that it is, right? So it is a carbon 13 or carbon 12 or carbon whatever, right? And it is in this exact geographical space, right? Let's assume that it just takes 1 byte of information. That's it. Feels pretty generous.
Pretty
right?
conservative, yeah.
Yeah. It would take a billion exabytes of information in order to of storage in order to store that information.
Yeah. And that is the aggressively conservative estimate.
Correct. Yep. And so interestingly, again, to bring it back in universe, that is 10 billion datas. All of data's maximum capacity for memory. If you took 10 billion of those to remember one Picard, right? They could get the job done, which basically means you would need a Gaia planet purely dedicated to remembering where all of Picard's atoms were located, right?
And then, if I recall correctly, in universe, they do not understand how Data's brain works. Like it is not settled science. Only his creator understood it.
Correct. Yeah. Like I think that with Data, I'm not sure if it's the memory or the way he processes information, but basically, yes, like if anything, his level of sophistication is on the very, very, very edge, right? Of like what people could understand. So even if they could just recreate his raw memory, but couldn't create his processing power or his neural net or whatever, right? It would still take 10 billion of them to, and again, this is one Picard. This ain't the whole away team. We don't have 5. I mean, we would have to dedicate all of the inner planets filled to the brim with data to remember the whole away team, right?
Yes, a star system of Gaia.
But now here's the interesting thing is that we're not done, because now even if you remember exactly where every single atom is, and then you put all of those atoms right back into place, you are then going to cause not a 1.16 gigaton explosion, but a fairly sizable explosion, because you haven't bonded any of those things together. You just put a bunch of atoms in place, and then they're all going to fly apart or just dissolve into a sludge. What you need to remember is how they're bonded with one another, right? So this carbon here, is it bonded to the carbon next to it? Is that a double bond or a triple bond or a single bond, right? So I try. So what I said is I was like, okay, so basically what that is a permutation, right? Not a combination, a permutation, right? So in a permutation, order matters, right? So like, I tried to say, I was like, okay, so and I looked up the equation for it, and I said like, okay, well, let's assume that we're trying to remember them in like 10 atom chunks, right? Like so A B B A B B B A, what have you, right? And I said, okay, so I plugged that in, and I think that it was like 10 to the 20th or something like that factorial. Any factorial calculator will only let you go up to 1,000 factorial, because then the number that you get was 10 to the 367th. So again, when 10 to the 27th is a billion, is 10 billion data, I was just like, okay, this has gotten stupid. So I say all of that to say that obviously that can't be what they're doing, right? So then the question is, it's like, okay, well, maybe you don't need to remember that, right? Maybe what you just need to remember is an amino acid, right? Like you can just do amino acid combinations, because that would way lower the complexity. Or maybe just cells. And in fact, if you're like, oh, okay, well, there's this many brain cells and this many heart cells and this many this cells, or maybe this many tissues or this many that. But then that brings you to problem 3, which is, as we discussed recently offline, are you you anymore? Or are you just a prefabbed you, right? Because if you're not remembering each individual item and each little neural impulse that was going right as the moment you were teleported, right? If you're just doing a prefab, like, all right, well, they had this many brain cells in this order connected in this way. It's like, well, okay, that just means that they made a new you.
Yeah,
and
it's a very high fidelity copy.
Correct, right. At which point then there's all sorts of philosophical problems of like, okay, so if we can just pony up the energy, can you just make a whole bunch of yous? You know, like what do you do then? Or better yet, if it's just kind of like, hey, you know what? I really love Teddy's long flowing locks of hair, so just give me that. Like, teleport me down, but when I'm down, I want to have the nice hair, you know?
Yeah, which Picard definitely would have done if that was an option.
Well, that's the thing, too, is that, like, you know, in universe, they've used the teleporter, because at one point they teleported somebody, and they were like, I think they said, like, oh, yeah, but they had some type of an issue, a disease, a sickness, and they were like, well, just don't teleport that part. And they were like, genius. And it's like, huge ethical problems there, you know?
Yes, massive philosophical concerns around this thing you just flippantly threw out. Which does remind me of the conversation we were having in Strange New Worlds, one of the newer series, but it is set right before the original series. So it's like just pre-Kirk era. They are like, oh, we're doing all these jokey things on the ship that are like things new recruits do. So like these existing crew members, they're like, oh, we're going to do funny things new recruits do and like recapture our youth and joy and stuff. And one of the things is she's sitting there chewing a piece of like mint gum and chew. And she goes, flavor's gone. And then the other character transports her and then brings her right back. So like in the exact spot she's sitting, she transports away and then transports right back and continues chewing and goes, flavor's back. And then it just like smash cuts to the next scene because it's like a bunch of funny like thing, you know, little vignettes all together. And I was just like, oh my God, like that was such a cavalier way to confirm that in universe, you do not survive being transported.
Oh, yeah, because basically then what that means, that the way that it works is it says like, this person has gum, you know? And so then they just, that gum was gone. And then they just, as opposed to trying to, because otherwise what they would have remembered is that the sugar that was in the gum, right, had been dissolved by their, you know, like saliva and had gone into their stomach and that they were starting to be digested. And that gum didn't have any sugar. So instead they teleported that person away. They came back and the sugar was still in the gum. Which then begs the question, right, is that if they're doing it that way, then unless they pulled energy from somewhere, which it's not established that they do, if they still had the same amount of energy, then that means that the sugar can't possibly be in the person's stomach, right? Because then you've created more sugar. There's now sugar in the gum and sugar in the person's stomach, right? Which therefore means that they didn't do that. They didn't scan the person and then bamf them in and bamf them back. They just said, well, this is the last scan of the person that we have. Bamf that person back, you know?
Close enough.
Yeah, good enough. Yeah, and then ultimately too is then so there's got to be some type of way that like they, because there's no like disconnect. It's not like when they teleport Picard down to the planet, he's like, I thought it was 3 days ago. What's going on? Right? He's not like suddenly amnesiac, right? So they have to have some way of like keeping track of your thoughts while you're being transported, which is crazy. So I gotta say, man, bang for my buck. Literally, I gotta go with transporters.
So I need to ask a few clarifying questions because I feel like you definitely know some of the like story elements from Star Trek better than I do. So one, isn't transporting like basically instantaneous? Because there are some episodes that use like a photo finish, right? Like someone is being transported off of a ship while the ship is exploding, right? Or like they're being transported from point A to point B, like while something that would have killed them is happening at their origin point. Like, is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
In theory, it happens at the speed of light.
No, I don't think that that's true. I think it must be happening faster than that. Right? Which means they're not moving your energy from point A to point B. They must be moving the information through subspace. So they do their crap Xerox scan of you, and they're like, I don't know, gum. And then because they can send that information through subspace faster than they could send the energy through physical space, right?
But the energy is sometimes interfered with physical space, or at least the signal is, because that's how we ended up with 2 Rikers. Which is, I mean, mind-blowing in and of itself.
Even more alarming question.
Because that means they had a whole extra Riker worth of information, or of energy, too. So that means that, like, at some point, Geordi's, not Geordi, but, like, whoever was on Riker's ship was, like, in the warp core and was like, we just saw, like, a huge draw on the warp core's energy. What happened there? I don't know. Like, how much energy would we lose? I don't know. Like, about 1 Riker's worth-ish, give or take? Weird. I don't know. Space Jam. Let's go, And then they just left him there to die.
Oh my God. I think I may have figured it out in a way that was equally horrifying in the source material. It's because they're not getting this energy from their universe. They're stealing it from another universe, and they just don't know it, right? This is the gate from Full Metal Alchemist.
I was going to say, yeah, it's Full Metal Alchemist. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, maybe I do feel that, like, if they were getting energy from, like, some unknown, because the idea, part of the idea behind it, right, is that, and they actually say once they had replicators, right, then, money stopped being a thing, because once you had an infinite source of stuff, right, like it stopped being necessary. And the idea behind it was that, like, we found some, I'm going to support you here. We found, because they use antimatter reactors, right,
Mm-hmm.
which means that they found some tremendous source of antimatter. Maybe from another universe.
Who knows?
That, like, maybe we're just eating other people, and it's just like, oh yeah, we got look at this. We got about 81 kilograms of antimatter. Where'd it come from? I don't know. But you use it to power the warp core and make my coffee and tea, Earl Grey, hot.
You know what? That reminds me of another thing I wanted to ask you.